This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, starts today's show as he discusses how a loss from the wheat crop doesn't mean that agriculture operations are failing. Continuing the show is K-State's Logan Simon and Anthony Zukoff as they explain stink bugs and bollworms in cotton and what management strategies are available to growers. Part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast ends the show as Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster talk about creep feeding calves and pasture management. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show discussing a bad wheat crop and what it means for the farm economy with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Shelby.
Roger, as we do look at this past wheat harvest, how did it look for Kansas?
Well, it's kind of historically poor, and that could be viewed as serious news for Kansas agriculture because it could mean fewer bushels to sell and less revenue available to cover expenses and financial pressure for producers whose operations are heavily dependent upon wheat. But I'd say a bad wheat crop and an economic collapse are not the same thing, and so I don't think we need to confuse the two.
And so when we think about the commodity loss versus the farm business loss, what are some big distinctions you see?
Well, I think the better question is, what does the entire farm business look like after the wheat loss? And that requires looking at a mix of what I would call enterprises here, a whole bunch of different things: the balance sheet, your working capital, your debt service, your crop insurance coverage, your tax planning, other sources of income that you have, and the new safety net that we have as a result of the Farm Bill provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That was a significant increase in the safety net. So I think the bottom line on all of that, when you look at it that way, is that Kansas agriculture can remain financially resilient in the aggregate, while individual farms might experience substantial financial stress.
And looking a little bit more just at these Kansas farms, the Kansas Farm Management Association puts out a lot of data, and the most recent being the 2025 year. And what did we see for those farms with how they're doing economically?
Actually, pretty good. Net farm income was $212,494. That's average net farm income for Kansas farms in the survey for 2025. That's more than double what it was for 2024. Now, the government payments that go into that, plus the net crop insurance proceeds, accounted for about half of that 212,000. And so without those payments and proceeds, the average accrual net farm income would have been 107,000 in 2025 compared to 98,000 or 99,000 in 2024. So slightly up, but still up. But it's that safety net that, we think net farm income is going to be even higher this fall. And in fact, in my tax seminars for CPAs and attorneys, we're already planning tax strategies for dealing with higher income for farmers, and that includes Kansas farmers this fall as a result of those Farm Bill provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So you've got pretty strong current ratios, 2025, 2.70 down from 2.72, so it's basically stable from where it was in 2024. And the ratio of working capital to operating expenses plus interest was 97.5%. And that measure is approaching, but still below the 100% level that KFMA identifies as an important liquidity benchmark. And at the same time, the average farm in the survey had $4.51 million in assets, $871,000 in liabilities, and a debt-to-asset ratio of only 19.14%. So that's really good. So you've got a kind of a mixed picture with the data. The Kansas farms generally entered 2026 with substantial equity and reasonable liquidity, but financial conditions varied significantly among operations. So in 2025, about 28% of KFMA farms had net farm income of 50,000 or less, while the least profitable 25% had average net farm income of negative 31,000. So in other words, the statewide averages don't indicate a farm financial collapse, but they also should not be used to suggest that every Kansas farm is financially comfortable. So there's kind of a wide range, but you take it on the average, things are pretty good in Kansas agriculture. But given that wide range, you've got some ones that are really struggling.
And ideally, we'd have a nice wheat crop, but unfortunately for many growers, we didn't see that. And so what are some risk management tools you see producers utilizing in their farm business?
Well, one is crop insurance. That's a risk transfer. It's not a government bailout. And so that's another reason I say that a poor wheat harvest doesn't automatically translate into a farm solvency crisis. This is modern risk management is what crop insurance is. Revenue protection crop insurance is a contractual risk transfer mechanism. And so the producer buys coverage, pays a premium, gets an indemnity when the loss satisfies the terms of the policy. And that the level of protection that you get depends on the coverage amount that's elected. And so your approved yield and your applicable policy provisions are all tied into what your amount of protection is. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to be profitable, and an indemnity doesn't automatically make every farm financially whole. It's a risk management strategy that has economic value to it. So if you had a severe yield or revenue loss, that could be materially less damaging to your cash position when an insurance indemnity is available. And also for your lender, the difference between an uninsured production failure and an insured loss can be significant when they're evaluating repayment capacity and liquidity. So that strategy, I think, is preferable for waiting for a disaster and then asking Congress for ad hoc rescue package, which is kind of the realm we're in with the Congress right now. So I think crop insurance is pretty good. And then you got a whole bunch of provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year, the OBA, that, as I've mentioned already, have really enhanced the farm safety net, plus the tax provisions that were in there.
What do you see as the biggest thing for Kansas growers that came from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act?
To narrow it down to one, there's just a whole host on the tax side. I would change my whole view of the economic outlook for Kansas farmers had the OBA not passed. But Congress did pass it. Not only did we get significant enhancements to the farm safety net, which those enhanced payments are going to be coming in October this year. But then on the tax side of things, OBA preserved a 20% income tax deduction off your business income as long as you're not a C Corp. Of course, C Corps have a rate that was lowered under TCJA. So if you're a pass-through type business or sole proprietorship, that 20% deduction on your business income was preserved. And you've got enhancement if you have children, significant enhancements in the child tax credit. You avoided a massive tax increase in terms of the rate brackets going up. And then, as we've mentioned, the commodity title had significant changes to the farm safety net. So there's a lot of nice stuff that had that not passed, we'd probably be talking about something different right now.
And on the thought of the government intervention, and when do you often see them stepping in for growers?
Well, the one principle here is that a farm safety net is not the same as government intervention. I think there's a distinction between a predictable rules-based ag safety net and an open-ended system of government intervention. So if we have a market-oriented farm policy, that doesn't require government to totally disappear from agriculture. It requires government to establish predictable rules and protect property and contract rights and facilitate that private risk transfer, facilitate that crop insurance program. And continue to maintain functioning credit markets and give us a transparent safety net filled with programs rather than repeatedly responding to every downturn with ad hoc bailouts. That's what I don't like about the kind of the procedure that we're in right now. Can't get a farm bill passed. Farm Bill 2.0, of course, there are a lot of these commodity provisions in the OBA, but the Congress is just reacting to specific economic events in agriculture. And that's not really something farmers can depend upon in terms of long-term policy. So, that all comes back to what we started with. A poor wheat crop is I think, precisely the kind of event that should cause producers and lenders and policymakers to examine risk management tools and liquidity and balance sheets and tax planning, and not automatically conclude that the entire agricultural economy has failed. It has not. So this has to be managed on kind of a micro basis, on a case-by-case basis.
As you do look at all this, then, what do you see for Kansas producers moving forward?
Well, there are real challenges. I don't want to downplay that. And those challenges should be taken seriously. But serious ag problems should be analyzed with the same discipline that farmers use when they make production and financial decisions. And so that means looking at your entire operation, measuring the risk, understanding your balance sheet, using your available risk management tools. Don't have any type of financial leakage due to overpaying taxes, so have a good, sound tax management strategy. Also, from a legal standpoint, make sure you're aware of issues that could lead to legal problems that would cause leakage of funds that way. We don't want to do that. So the bottom line is that you have to avoid confusing a temporary setback with permanent economic failure. And so a bad wheat crop's just that. It's just a bad wheat crop. It's not by itself a farm economic collapse.
If people want to read more on this topic or other topics like it, how can they do that?
I've written a recent article on this, and it's posted to K-State's Ag Manager. It's also on my primary website for my blog, Law Professors Blog Network, but it's also on the Ag Manager website. It's dated August 8th.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. If you would like to read more on this topic, I will link his blog article, A Bad Wheat Crop is Not a Farm Economic Collapse, in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about stink bugs and bollworms in cotton with K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon and K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. Logan, Anthony, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having us on.
Anthony, what is a stink bug?
Well, stink bugs are true bugs, so they have piercing, sucking mouth parts, so that's how they'll be impacting plants, with sharp beaks sucking out plant juices. But a stink bug is going to be a shield-shaped insect. They're going to come in brown or green if you're looking for them out in the field. And they're pretty much generalist insects, and they're found on a lot of different plants throughout the growing season. And it's this time of year where they might be attracted to cotton and start moving into fields as cotton starts to flower and set bolls, because these insects are going to be particularly attracted to reproductive structures on those plants.
Where do we usually find them on a cotton plant?
When we're scouting for them, if we're looking visually along the plants, you're going to see them kind of gravitating towards the flowering structures, especially if bolls are already forming. You're going to be wanting to look around the bolls because they are going to be attracted to those bolls, and they're going to be actively feeding on those developing bolls. So that's where you're going to want to focus for stink bugs in cotton.
And Logan, with your interaction with cotton growers in Kansas, are we seeing them out there?
It's something that we've definitely got to be keeping our eyes out for, as they can be active this time of year in the Kansas cotton crop. Right now, with all of the heat that we've had across the state of Kansas, we have really been moving these cotton plants along through flowering and boll development. So right now, as those bolls are developing on those plants, is when we can see that feeding that we get from these stink bugs. It's important that folks remember that some of the feeding of the stink bugs and their impact on the ultimate value of that cotton crop might not necessarily be observed in terms of pounds of lint produced by that crop. But what happens at those feeding sites is those warts develop on the interior side of the boll wall, tied to that outer darkened lesion on the exterior of the boll. From there, you also have these wounds that can be introduced to that boll that then open up for the potential for boll rot to develop, where we will see the interior developing lint begin to degrade. When you break that boll open, you'll see that it turns brown or just generally discolored, and resultingly is going to be directly dragging down our lint quality. And that's where we really see the biggest economic hit from the presence of stink bugs out there in the field.
As growers are out scouting their fields, is there a treatment threshold for managing these in some way?
Yeah, so threshold for stink bugs, when you're out there scouting for them, particularly you want to pay attention to the time frame between 3 and 5 weeks during bloom. That's when the bolls that are present are going to be most susceptible to stink bug feeding. So the wall of the boll is going to be easily pierced by those piercing, sucking mouth parts, and that will contribute to the interior damages that Logan mentioned. Between 3 and 5 weeks of bloom, if you're out there scouting your bolls, which you need to be actively scouting and opening up bolls, you're going to want to key in on bolls that look like they have outer discoloration or lesions, like Logan mentioned. And if you have 10% of bolls showing interior damage, that would be threshold for stink bugs.
10% in the whole field, or what's that sizing?
I would say, you want to look at several areas throughout the field. You could start on the edges of the field to see if stink bugs are present, but you're going to want to go interior in that field in several locations. Try to target 100 plants. And if 10% of the bolls on those plants are showing interior damage, then you're probably going to want to make a decision to knock back the stink bug population.
What are a few control options, Anthony?
Luckily for stink bug, there are a lot of products registered in Kansas that will control stink bug, so there won't be any kind of difficulty picking something. But just keep in mind, a lot of the products used to control stink bugs will kill all the other insects in the field, and cotton is a very diverse crop when it comes to insect communities. The flowers draw in all kinds of insects. Cotton has extrafloral nectaries that are pulling in a lot of insects, so you're going to have a lot of bugs out there. Luckily, only a handful can be a problem, but these chemicals that you're going to choose for treating stink bugs will kill everything and could lead to secondary pest problems later in the season. So please just only make applications when absolutely necessary.
And one of those other pests that could be causing problems out there in the cotton field, bollworms, and what do these look like?
Well, bollworms, another insect you want to be scouting for this time of year. Bollworm is a caterpillar of a moth, a boring kind of tan-colored moth. The cotton bollworm, it's also known as corn earworm because it's the same insects that attacks corn ears this time of year. They'll hatch from tiny eggs. They'll be little tan, brownish colored caterpillars at first. As they grow, they'll start to take on some striping, some notable spots on their segments, and some scattered hairs. The color can vary from yellow to green to pink. It's all over the place.
Do we see any differences on the damage that they could be doing based on the variety that growers have chosen to plant?
So it's important that folks keep bollworms in mind, even though we have the presence of the BT trait in all of our commercially available cotton varieties that we're growing here in Kansas. Depending on the seed that the producer has, they're probably either running with a Wide Strike 3 or Bollgard 3 trait, which conveys that resistance to these Lepidopteran species, these caterpillars. Even so, although not in Kansas necessarily, other areas have observed instances of resistance developing to these BT traits. And with that in mind, the biggest interest we have here in maintaining that continued scouting for bollworms is that mind of, are these BT traits holding up? Do we see them lapsing? What's going on? There's a lot of BT pressure out there for these populations. As Anthony mentioned, it's the same insect that's going to be attacking corn ears. And so with that in mind, we've got a larger area of the state of Kansas than just cotton where we have the potential for the development of this resistance. So it's just really emphasizing that when we're thinking about why continue to care about bollworms.
Do you have any concerns for it impacting yield for cotton or the quality of the cotton?
Again, it's one of those things where we've got that potential, right, for these insects to cause some significant damage to a cotton crop if we get the development of resistance, both in terms of diminishing yield as we're actively seeing feeding through that early developing boll. And then again, as similar was the case for stink bugs, you're opening up those lesions on that boll, which are pathways for the development of boll rot. And so, again, another pathway for diminishing quality in that. Now, if we are out there and scouting, it is important that folks remember the way that the BT trait works, right? So that BT crop has to be ingested by the caterpillar in order for that to make it into the digestive tract of the insect and have activity. So upon ingesting that toxin, those developing larvae are going to basically stop feeding within a few hours, but it can take a little bit longer for them to finally die. But again, like I say, they have to ingest that plant material for it to have that activity in the insect.
Is there a time then where we want to use other control options by chance?
So it doesn't matter if you've planted a BT cotton variety or a non-BT cotton variety. Both types need to be scouted for this pest. One, just to make sure that if you are running a BT variety, that those toxins are still controlling the bollworm. Like Logan mentioned, there's issues of resistance in our southern states. We just want to know if it's working. If you're in a field that's not BT traded, you're going to want to scout. And if you're seeing 10 eggs per 100 plants or 5 small caterpillars per 100 plants in that non-BT field, that would be threshold. So you'd want to choose something to treat that field because you might end up having some economic losses. If you're in a BT field, the threshold's a little different. So if you're finding 10 caterpillars per 100 plants, or you could scout just the flowers. If you're finding 6 caterpillars per 100 flowers, that would be threshold in a BT field if you're seeing damage as well. So there are thresholds for both fields. We don't want folks just to plant their fields and then walk away thinking that they're protected season long. They likely are. We don't know of any issues in Kansas, but we want to make sure that we catch any issues if they happen to show up. So scouting, no matter what you've planted, is really important when it comes to bollworm.
Are there any timing considerations?
One thing for producers to be mindful of is the potential for that worm to have an effect based on the development of the crop. For cotton in the state of Kansas that is at or approaching cutout, which is 4 to 5 nodes or flowering within 4 to 5 nodes at the top of the plant, that need for bollworm control has largely passed. As we know, those later developing flowers contribute much less to the overall yield of cotton in Kansas, just due to our shorter growing season. Therefore, we make less of an emphasis on those later developing bolls. So if you are in that circumstance, you may be past that window, but otherwise continue, as we say, be monitoring for the efficacy of these products and make sure that we don't see this resistance to BT developing in bollworms in Kansas.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon and K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster.
Phillip, I'm going to turn to you and have you start with the definition. So we had some questions relative to creep feeding. Maybe tell us, what is, when somebody says creep feeding, what does that mean to you? And then we'll dive into the intricacies of it.
I think maybe kind of a pure definition would be providing some source of feed that nursing calves have access to that the dams do not have access to. And that can be several different things. We generally think about a creep feeder where we're feeding a grain supplement, and the calves, we have a creep gate where the calves can get to the feeder and the cows can't. But you could also do things like creep grazing, where you have plot of high-quality forage and with a creep gate that the calves can get into there and graze on that, and the cows cannot. So there's different ways of doing it, providing different feedstuffs and things like that. But overall, we're providing something to the calves with limiting the access by the dams.
So, Bob, what's the reason that you would do creep feeding, and is there a time frame that this makes sense?
Yeah, we often get questions about creep feeding as we get kind of towards the end of the grazing season, so starting about now and going into the early fall. And it's because, the forage quantity and or quality are going down. And, for an adult cow that doesn't have a growth component, the nutrients that are available in the forage may be perfectly fine to maintain her body condition. But a young growing animal, think teenager, they would benefit from some additional calories and show that with additional growth. And so then one of the questions is, well, so as the forage decreases in it, the total caloric potential for that calf to consume, maybe we could add some additional grain or byproduct feeds that would kind of meet some additional calories. The real question starts to come to, is that the best way to do it, and is it cost effective? So the other way to get extra calories into the calves is actually to wean them and then put them on a total diet that meets their caloric needs. And sometimes that meets some of our goals if we're kind of worried about the carrying capacity of the ground or something like that. Taking those calves off, by the time they're a pretty big calf, they're consuming, I don't know, Philip, 2% of their body weight, maybe?
Probably consuming close to 10 pounds of dry matter when they're, 400 to 500 pounds.
Yeah. So I take all those calves away, and that's basically removing quite a bit of grazing pressure, and then that leaves more for the cows.
Well, and you take the lactation drive off the cow, her intake will drop by 20-25%.
But if you creep feed them, is he going to nurse less?
I wouldn't say so, in that he's a teenager. He's going to eat everything you present him. So
But you're going to have milkshakes before you have your vegetables.
Yeah, probably so.
Their preference is for milk, and then probably the creep feed. So what you're going to replace is the forage in their diet, is what you're going to replace. Which has some implications to it.
Yeah, but not as if my goal of creep feeding is to put condition back on my cows. That may not help.
No. We don't generally think that that's going to make a big difference.
Is there a too early time to start creep feeding? So if I'm exposed, because I know, and we've had discussions, beef dairy calves, they're exposed to feed relatively early in life. Should I expose some of these beef calves when they're 2 weeks old, a month old, 6 weeks old?
That's a really interesting question. And I've had that thought before. With those calves in a dairy system, we're going to wean them pretty early off milk, 2 months, something like that. And the reason we give them grain instead of forage is because the grain increases the speed of rumen development. It's more easily digested by bacteria. It produces a higher volume of volatile fatty acids, and so you get rumen development of the microbiome in there and the rumen epithelial tissue itself faster, so that you can transition them off of milk sooner. And so I don't know that there's any research that I'm aware of that would that be beneficial to a beef calf? And, we don't really have a good answer to that, but it's an interesting question.
That's what we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.